Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back again to the True Life Podcast. I hope that everybody's having a beautiful day. I hope that you are surrounded by people you love and the sun is shining, the birds are singing, and you have something to look forward to. Got a great show for you today. We have someone who is that I find on a on a level that speaks to me. We started talking about this idea of moksha medicine. But before I get ahead of myself, let me introduce Prema Sagara, clinical director of the neuro wellness team at Moksha Journeys. You know, and maybe you could talk a little bit about Prema before we talk about Moksha Journeys. Maybe you could introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your journey before we talk about the Moksha Journeys.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great starting point.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. So my journey, how did I come to do what I do? We go all the way back from the beginning. Um, you know, I'd like to start with my real origin story.
Yeah.
Which begins with my ancestors, my mother and her parents. I like to put the lens on my mother because that is really kind of like my superhero origin story. My mother is Indigenous Central American, and her family came to the U.S. in the 40s, and they became migrant workers in California. And at the time, in the 40s and 50s, it was common practice for the migrant workers to get crop dusted while they were working in the fields. So they'd be picking fruits and vegetables, and the planes would come. And my mom describes the scene, in a certain way. At the time she was living, the Air Force allowed them to live at these barracks that were not in use, that were part of the base, Vandenberg Air Force Base.
Okay.
And so they would sleep there and then work in the fields in the surrounding areas. And she describes how many of the women in the community became sterile, and both men and women were developing rapid onset of fatal types of cancer, especially neurological cancer. And so she was sterilized, and later on she ended up moving a little bit south to Los Angeles, which was in the mid to late 60s, and she got into the health scene, the burgeoning health scene that was happening. So she worked with a number of different practitioners. Back then, they were doing saunas with niacin flushes.
Okay.
And early diet explorations. So she actually used to listen to a radio show with this particular gentleman named Dr. Robert Marshall. And many decades later, at least 40 years later, I would end up studying with Dr. Robert Marshall. He was a PhD of biochemistry and a clinical nutritionist. And he was a huge influence on me because my parents, I was exposed to his work early on and used some of his products as a child. But the real turning point came from my mom when she got into working with Dr. Stig Erlander, who I think was in Arcadia or somewhere around that area in the greater LA area. And he put her and my father on this particular protocol, which was basically to improve methylation in the body. And so it was a detoxification protocol, and they had to eliminate all toxins from their living environment, which Dr. Erlander was a real pioneer. Methylation has become a huge topic in functional medicine these days. But he had some different methods. Definitely his detox ideas were on point. And then he was trying to methylate the body using food. So he was especially focusing on carrots, Because I don't know what your background is with nutrition, but carrots and beets are both root vegetables that are really high in methyl groups. And methyl groups basically are what keep our cells young and keep our DNA from aging. So they were eating a lot of steamed carrots, and his advice was always to drink the steam water as well. And so they would eliminate things like this is really getting into my childhood. I rarely talk about this with anyone, because I don't get this deep into my origin story normally. But it's really part of my passion and shaped my path. So they would eliminate all hydrocarbon-based toxins, especially. So like no VOC paint and not using central forced air heat that didn't, because back then the gas was burning and the system would just push air and you would get the byproducts in the living environment. Now they have closed systems that aren't as toxic. But, back for many decades, people are breathing in, hydrocarbon metabolites basically that age the body and act as toxins that demethylate our genes and not only accelerate aging, but they can induce pathologies. So you get rid of all the airborne toxins, you get rid of all the toxic cleaners, toxic body care, and you eat organic and pasture-raised products. So we grew up getting these deliveries from a pasture-raised company. That back in, we were doing this. They were started in the 70s and 80s. It was pioneering stuff.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So so that my mom started doing that protocol, I think probably in the mid 70s. And then, that not too long after that, I was born. She had been trying for many, many, many years. So it was a great victory. But, it wasn't perfect. I was born with a congenital defect of the left ureter where it attached to the kidney. And so urine couldn't pass out through that side. So all the metabolic waste was going back into the blood and ultimately compounding at the liver and causing acute autotoxicity. And so as an infant, I was extremely ill just from the get-go. And as far back as I can remember, I was going to the hospital. My parents didn't know what to do because I would vomit frequently every night for years, basically. Unexplained vomiting. And so, I had every type of scan and diagnostic done on me. In time, I started getting more neurological symptoms. And I described the primary symptom as a quote unquote brain bomb.
Break that down for us, man. What's a brain bomb?
The brain bomb. I think it's unique to me. I've never heard anyone describe it. But it was an intense nerve sensation that was happening in the back of my cranium, and kind of like at that nest at the crown. But it would go along the whole back of my neck, and it would kind of move in a spiral motion when it would come on like a wave, and it would go towards the crown and kind of like implode on itself. So the wave would start more generalized and then converge at the crown, and it would feel like the nerves were all firing simultaneously in a wave pattern that would converge at the crown, starting around at my neck, and kind of like maybe upper trapezius. So, that's the brain bomb, and it was painful, but not like any other sensation I've ever experienced. It was very kind of jarring and consuming, but it didn't feel like any other sensation. I could say it's painful, but it was mostly kind of like disorienting. but very, very visceral, you know, like
Yeah.
in terms of the feeling like the sensation was coming from deep within.
Yeah.
So not necessarily in the viscera, but, you know, in the deeper tissues of the body. And so I would describe that complaint to the doctors, and they did everything you can think of, including I went to University of San Diego and did a sleep study. And then after that, they put a computer in a backpack with sensors and a cast over my head. And so I walked around living my life for a little while, and they were all the bio data. And, you know, and in and out of emergency rooms and children's hospital and, you know, local hospitals. And it wasn't until I was 6 years old, probably almost 6.5, where I got to the point that my body actually was failing. And I remember that a particular doctor had told me, like, you know, you've gotten to a point where you know, we might consider doing some type of surgery on you, but well, actually, I'm getting ahead of myself. What actually happened was I actually collapsed. I was running a jogathon.
And I remember those.
Yeah, right?
Yeah, totally.
Running a jogathon, and I was, you know, trying to get that money.
Yeah, of course, man. You got all the people, all your neighbors signed up, threw in 50, 60 cents for a lap. I'm with you, man.
Right. So I was really pushing myself. And then my body gave out on the track. And I lost consciousness and just fell to the ground and crumpled down. And, you know, the next thing I remember is being in the hospital. And that was the first time where I had lost consciousness like that. And so up to that point, I hadn't been diagnosed with anything. You know, everyone was exploring and attempting to figure something out. And it wasn't until that point where they did a simple x-ray, and just at a hospital I'd never been to, and they located the abnormality in the kidney. That entire time, for 6.5 years, they were looking in the central nervous system and in the brain. They were doing all the scans on the brain, and they didn't look anywhere else. You know, which is kind of a stereotype of allopathy. Right? Like, what the term etiology, like, how do you define that and how do you approach it? It's like, in holistic systems, the root cause, you know, is often understood that it can be located in a different region separate from your symptomology. You know, that might not have an obvious correlation, but with a system, primarily 5 element systems that come from the East, but also in ancient Greek medicine, you know, there's the concepts of the 3 humors, which have a basis in the 5 elements or the 4 elements. And in those systems, they will understand, like in Chinese medicine, that the kidneys are very much associated with the central nervous system. So, you know, anyways, that's kind of jumping ahead.
It's all right. It's foreshadowing.
Right. Yeah. So we got a good surgeon, a kidney specialist that works on children, and pretty rapidly they did an angioplasty, and they cut open that ureter and put a silicone bladder in there, and it opened it up, and that definitely made a huge difference. It was extremely beneficial. It ended the brain bombs. So I'm super grateful for that, because I definitely felt like it saved my life. You know, I'm not sure what the outcome would have been otherwise, but it wasn't, you know, I couldn't sustain that. I think I would have gone downhill, you know, over the years if I didn't get that procedure. So that's great. However, there was, you know, there's all these other aspects to it that were unaddressed. You know, my liver was in trouble, and no one did anything for the liver. You know, all of those years of the metabolic waste going into the liver, that degraded the liver function significantly. and my digestive system was not good. I didn't have good digestion, assimilation, absorption. So by the time I got into my, into puberty, and with the increased nutritional needs that people have, the young, developing
Right.
youth have, I wasn't, you already need more nutrition to develop in a healthy manner when you reach puberty. And most kids don't get an ideal nutritional support. But you need your glands need support. You need minerals. Minerals are the core of hormone synthesis. And your body's growing, and you definitely need a lot of minerals and all kinds of other support. But I think if parents out there just gave their children mineral supplementation, which is what I advocate a lot for, it would make a huge difference. But I didn't, I wasn't digesting my food hardly, so I wasn't even getting any basic level of nutrition hardly. So, in my teen years, I developed severe depression. And, just a lot of health issues. I mean, at one point, I was having one bowel movement a week.
Whoa, that's crazy.
Yeah, it was crazy. I mean,
your parents must have been scared out of their minds, like, as you were growing up. They're like, what? They must have been like, what's going on, man? They are superheroes. Amazing people, just by being parents and going through all this and getting you the help. I'm sure that wasn't easy for them, right?
Right. No, I mean, my parents, I have good fortune. They were so supportive all along and did whatever they could. So yeah, I'm blessed. I feel.
Sorry, I sidetracked you there. I just wanted to give a shout out to them though, because parents are awesome.
They are, yeah. They were great parents. My mom's still with us, and she's an amazing lady. So I felt like, my life was saved by the strengths of allopathic medicine.
Mm-hmm.
I think anyone who's done the dance with the hospital system and standard allopathy, and who has chronic disease, many people get in that position, get to a point where you realize that there are not great solutions available in allopathic medicine, right? I mean, I think people who are listening to this podcast, probably that's a given, like they get that, So I got to a point where I was like, I have to take my health into my own hands, I feel like. And so I began pursuing healing traditions. But I would say that it was in my mid-teens where I really started getting interested in Enlightenment traditions.
Mm-hmm.
And, it was out of that, interest and self-study where, it started branching into more holistic ways of living, that are part and parcel with those traditions, in my opinion. So, and that's kind of like how I got to psilocybin in that time period. That's the beginning of like how my paths led me to Moksha Journeys. So let's see, how do we want to synthesize that?
Well, that's a beautiful. Maybe we'll just take a moment to think about that path and how it seems to me, and it seems to me, whether we return to Joseph Campbell or we return to the Greek tragedies, that in all people's lives, there's almost like this mythological structure that happens. And it's like you've come up and you face this threshold guardian and you're cast back down. And whether it's an actual guardian or it's a giant owl named Moloch, or whether it's a disease that attacks you where you can't do anything about it, I always admire people telling me their origin story, because I think it speaks volumes of, I think people can see in their own life, their own battles they're fighting. So I just want to say thank you for sharing that. And then, I think from moving on from that journey, and then you started talking about some enlightenment types of ideas that you began to explore. Maybe before you get into the ideas of Moksha Journeys. Maybe like there's another chapter of some of the other enlightenment things that you've explored.
Yeah. I mean, that is really kind of the intermediate phase.
Yeah, totally.
but it was around that time in my mid-teens where when I grew up Christian.
Okay.
I grew up Catholic initially, and then I got into I started going to a Lutheran private school when I was 10, or maybe I just turned 11 years old, and I found the Lutheranism, the Protestantism, especially in that Lutheran form, to be refreshing. I hadn't been exposed to that before.
Yeah.
It's like, oh wow, I like the idea that we could have a more simplified, direct relationship with Christ, and we could just like get out of some of the aspects of the Catholic Church that growing up I didn't really resonate with.
Right.
So, that was like 11 years old. I was like taking it pretty seriously. I was like, I gotta go study all this. I'm gonna bring my parents to this church, and my whole family converted to Lutheranism. And so for like 4 or 5 years, I thought that was really interesting. But then I started really getting interested in Eastern spiritual traditions, and so I recall probably being 16 years old and having read, I had acquired like a collection of Buddhist sutras, like the Diamond Sutra and the Heart Sutra, the Thousand Songs of Milarepa. And I had visited a Hindu tantric temple in our area in the hills, and I thought that was incredible. They had like a koi pond and a library and this beautiful monastery, very peaceful. And so the gears were going, right? They were starting to turn. I was like, there's something here for me. And within a couple of years, probably a year and a half, I had gone to Borders Books. Remember, I had gone to Borders Books. Yeah, you remember?
Yeah, Borders is awesome.
It was awesome. Love browsing.
Yeah. Yep.
And on one of the tables, on the display tables, they had this little display, and it was like this stack of books, this one title that had on the cover really psychedelic art. It was like black light art, and there was psychedelia on it, and it was a collection of stories on all of the counterculture icons of the 60s and 70s. So it was recounting kind of like the how Gordon Wasson went to Mexico, and it was recounting when he brought Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert and what was happening. It was a lot of like quotations and dialogue and like real kind of they pieced together a lot of different sources and made it pretty coherent, and it was like this incredible narrative. And I tried to find that book. I don't have it anymore, and I can't find the title, but it was really a cool book.
Yeah. Did that speak like being where your heritage is from like your family coming from Central Mexico? Was that like another factor that was like, whoa, this is my roots right here as well? Was that a factor?
Yeah, I think for sure, because also at the time there was I had watched Altered States movie.
Okay. Yeah.
And like all of it was very magnetic, right? There was in the movies, they go to Mexico, right? And in the book I'm reading, and I like could feel the connection to the volcano where they went to get the mushroom off the mountainside, right? And for sure, that was like, I remember being entranced by the idea of wildcrafting a mushroom on the side of a mountain in Mexico, and for sure it was speaking to me at some type of morphogenetic, genetic level, ancestral memory level. And then a couple years after that, I was really deep into the health scene in California. I had gotten into these communities where people were experimenting with plant-based diets at the time, and it was a real kind of exciting time where people were talking about the Essenes, and I definitely feel that there, even after all my studies in all of the trends and all of the science and the place of all the different types of diets, quote unquote, the plant-based diet has a function and a purpose and a time and a place. And, I at that time, we were like, wow, we're discovering something. It felt like we were discovering something, like, definitely experimenting with psychedelics and trying to live off living foods. And so I got together with these guys, and one of them was named Gonzalo, and one of them was named Eddie, and they were both Mexican, and they owned these shops that had like all these kind of psychedelic references, and they were a big influence on me. They were giving me books on plant-based diets, and like one of their shops had these like neon mushroom art signs, and and it turns out that Gonzalo actually owns property in that area, and actually knew Maria Sabina and used to go down
No
there.
way.
Well, he still goes down there, but he had a connection to her back then, and he's an original player.
Yeah. Cuendero. Is there something like that? Am I butchering that?
Yeah, that did pretty good. Yeah. So what am I missing? That was a really pivotal time, mid to late teens, and I, in that period, I debated whether or not I would confess this, but I have to say that one of my early influences, it was really pivotal as well, was both Alex Gray and his work with the band Tool, which I don't really confess to too many people these days. But it was huge for me because, I bought the Tool's album Lateralis when I was 15 years old, and the album art was incredible, right? And it was their first collaboration with Alex Gray, and the layered album sleeve that had all the anatomical layers of man, and then the spiritual layers, and the spiral eyes, and the way you leaf through it, and you would all the layers would add up at the end to make this incredible mandala of like a divine prototype of man, with just incredible psychedelic symbolism. And I was like, man, I became obsessed with Alex Gray's work at that time. I was like just getting online, in the nascent days of the internet, and trying to find images, the scans of his art. And I read everything that I could about Alex Gray, and was always like just contemplating his paintings and his everything about it, his live art. I thought his early live art installations were just mind blowing, especially like the Om Mani Padme Hum installation was phenomenal. So that was 15, and then that was such a huge influence. And I bought that book that I described, and then the next month I went to the last Tool concert of their Lateralis tour, and the stage show that they had on that tour was all Alex Gray, and he actually went on tour with them and painted the singer's body, I think every night, where he would paint the flaming eye in a spiral pattern on each limb and up his spine, and 2 layers going on the sides of his head down to his forehead, these flaming eyes just all over, down his legs to his feet, and then the rest of his body was painted black, and then he would get illuminated with a black light. And then I'm gonna digress a little and describe.
Yeah, go for it, man. This is awesome.
Okay. So I was 16, and I went to this show with my brother, and it was at the Long Beach Arena. And wow, I mean, on the backdrop, the huge screen on the back, they were projecting different pieces of Alex Gray, of his paintings. And so there was a number of different paintings that are all very iconic, like that feature his eye patterns, the net patterns, but they were shifting in colors that are not standard. So like each color would become a different color. was incredibly psychedelic, and it had a whole like living, breathing pattern to it. And then as the show progressed, they kept adding more elements. So they have their kind of iconic standard sacred geometry metal sculpture that they suspend from the rafters. So that now then that drops down in front of Alex Grade's artwork, and then they have these big balloon sculptures that were like supposed to be cells, like conglomerations of cells that they were floating in the air with some type of fan. And so these giant like cellular masses were like floating all around. And then they added these kind of, I don't know if they were screens or tapestries, but then in front of everything, they put his Sacred Mirrors series at the end. And, you know, this whole time Maynard is like fully dressed at the beginning, and he's stripping down more and more to the point where he's, you know, just wearing a Speedo, and he's basically like, you know, this spiral black art living sculpture. And he's on a platform that has the golden mean ratio spiral drawn on it. And then that platform is spinning in a circle while he's standing on it. And, and, you know, that lines up with the lyrics in some of the songs, which are, you know, if you dig deep into his work, you understand that he went through a phase, I think probably in the 80s, went around his time in art school, where he ate mescaline, I believe, peyote. And he wrote these poems, a series of poems. And all those poems went into the songs of that album, which came out like 20 years later. And so, you know, some of the lyrics his lyrics were such an inspiration to me at that time. Very spiritually awakening for me. And you know, it's a little lesser known fact that their drummer is in a Western mystery tradition. And so at that time, I got really interested in the drummer, and because some of the drummer's friends were documenting online their journey to Rennes le Chateau and to like the south of France where Mary Magdalene went when she was cast out. And so, you know, that was hugely influential on me. And so, you know, it was all converging, right? That show, after I went to that show, and in the middle of the show, they take an interlude and they play a clip from one of their older albums. And it's a song that incorporates this long clip of Timothy Leary talking. And, you know, the main slogan is "Think for yourself, question authority." And, you know, he starts giving a discourse on that. And, gosh, I remember standing there in the crowd and listening to him talk. And I'd heard that clip many times, but when you're there with all the art and all the energy, and it was like, boom. And I was like, I've been reading this book, and now I've made the decision. I'm going to have my first psilocybin journey.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so awesome. You've just created like a generation of new Tool fans.
Oh, man. Yeah.
That's such an awesome. I didn't know any of that. Like, I didn't know his background. I didn't know those things about him. And I'm gonna, as soon as we're done, I'm gonna go look up on YouTube and see if I can find the video of him painted like that, sitting in like the golden ratio. That sounds amazing. I can't imagine seeing that at the stage you were in your life and how influential that would have been.
Yeah. Yeah. Right on. No, you're feeling me.
Yeah, dude, I'm picking up what you're putting down, brother.
If you want to find it, I know you can find it on like that particular show, Long Beach 2002 Lateralis tour, because that was the last show of the tour, and it was like, you know, the grand send off. So there's a good video out there of that. But I feel like I digressed a bit there.
Oh, necessary. That was totally necessary, man.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, I think you're getting that. Like, I feel like it was a long time ago, and it's important, you know, it was formative and really helped to inform my trajectory. So yeah. So where do we go from there?
Wow. I mean, so Let me just think for a minute. I got to digest that a little bit, because I'm thinking of the pivotal times in which I've had in my life where I got to see, and music has always been a part of them. For me, I got to go, I graduated in the early 90s, and my friend and I, we drove my Volkswagen bus up to Autzum Stadium up there in Oregon, in Eugene. We went to go see a Dead show, and I'll never forget, like, man, we bought like a quarter pound of weed and drove my bus up the whole way, camped in some forest. And I'll never forget, like, we got up there like a day early, and I'm like, dude, are you my friend Craig and I'm like, dude, Craig, man, are you sure this is the spot? There's like nobody here. And we crashed out that night, and I woke up in the morning and there was just buses on all sides of me. I was like, whoa, this is so nuts. But for me, like, I understand the power that a good, not only good music, but a psychedelic setting, in almost, it's almost an art form. It's almost like you're part of a painting, like you're part of this piece of artwork and you're working through it. You're like, I'm in this piece of artwork right here. And it gives you this weird way of seeing yourself in a third person point of view while simultaneously taking everything in around you. And it's dramatic, and it's poetic, and it's William Blake and Aristotle all combined into one.
Wow.
You're right there, right?
I feel you. I really feel it. Wow. You're doing a great job.
Well, thanks, man. I mean, you're inspiring me with this kind of stuff.
Well, I mean, your experience too, you're talking about that time in Eugene. I mean, gosh.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. I'll never forget, because I had just, it was almost one of the beginnings of my psychedelic experience, because I had begun taking mushrooms and going to like the Laser Door show or the Laser Floyd show, where you sit down in like a laserium, and they would project these 3D images of like Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon. And so that was the beginning. And then we went on this trip up there, and that was one of the first times my friend and I had bought LSD for the first time. And it was just mind blowing to be in this other world where you're surrounded by all these people, and you're driving your Volkswagen bus, and there's this really hot hippie girl next to you selling MDMA. And I'm pretty sure she's talking to me, because she's saying my name and telling me to come over there. And I'm like, my friend's like, she's not talking to you. I'm like, yeah, she is, man. Can you see? But it's, I don't know. I think there's something to be said about youth and exploration and heightened states of awareness that you really mesh into when you're at a pivotal age. And those kinds of experiences will fundamentally change you for the rest of your life. It changes your trajectory. And it's almost like you have to make a decision. Like you have to invite that into you so that it can flow through you and change your course of direction. And that's what when you were talking about that, I was so enamored by your story, and it just filled me up with memories of my own story. So thank you for letting me share that, man. That felt great, man. Thank you. Yeah. So from there, I began reading some interesting books as well, and I started finding myself going down these mystic traditions and mystery schools. And you start thinking of The Doors of Perception with Huxley, and you're like, wow, man, this guy wrote Brave New World, man. This guy's out of his mind, man. You know what he wants? He wants to create this world. And, like you start going down these rabbit holes. And then as I got older, I found the book, The Island, which in this book, The Island, it's almost the antidote to Brave New World. It's like, one is this dystopia and one is this utopia over here. And that book for me was eye-opening, because you got to see the way in which the moksha medicine, you got to see the way in which a really well-dosed society with a real strong connection to mysticism and community can find these medicines and use them as a sort of rite of passage. When we get back to the mystery schools, when you see the kids climbing up the mountain to sit in the church and sit with the older child, like, that kind of stuff spoke to me. And it's probably because I have had an absence. And I think most people in the Western traditions have an absence of rites of passage. There's no more, there's echoes of a quinceañera, there's echoes of a bar mitzvah, but there's not really that tradition for young men to go through. So, and that's kind of what it was, with whether it's your experience watching Tool or my experience going to a Dead show. it's almost this rite of passage that we found our own way. We found our own people. So I guess when we start thinking about books and Huxley and William Blake and all these rites of passage, I begun thinking of Huxley, which got me into moksha medicine. So that was my destination to moksha medicine. What was your introduction to moksha medicine?
Well, I think, the reason that we were going to call our company Moksha Medicine originally, well, at one point, I should say. And that was actually chosen by my co-founder, Rose Mulan Franco. And I think, you should consider having her on for an interview as well.
Open invitation, Rose. I would love to talk to you.
And she's the one that really chose that name, Moksha Medicine, because I felt like I want to give a little bit of a quick intro to Rose, because
please.
That's how Moksha got into our name.
Yes.
So Rose, I want her to tell her story.
Okay.
I'll tell you briefly that she was around in the time of these counterculture icons, right? And so Huxley, these things were fresh and when she was a youth, and she's really influenced by Alan Watts as well.
I love it.
Heavily. She considers Alan Watts to be her first teacher. And so that happened, and she has you'll get her story, and it as I tell people, it is my main shining inspiration of what I want to achieve in my life. But she actually is an Army veteran. She was in the Army during the Vietnam era, but she didn't fight in the war, but she did have trauma from her experience, severe trauma. And I'm going to hopefully let her tell that story. But she was married to a Purple Heart, Bronze or Silver Star recipient, who was a Vietnam War hero. And he passed away due to complications from Agent Orange. So and she has this whole trajectory of how, she had these spiritually awakening her initiations when she was in her teens. And then she got into the military, and then she got out of the military. And ultimately, I shouldn't say ultimately. She became a licensed psychotherapist after the military, and she owned a trauma and addiction treatment center. And so she did that in the Austin, Texas area. And she owned that center for 15 years, during which time, she probably won't tell you this, but I'll tell you, she had amazing results. They had a whole team, and they had amazing results with their clientele, and she was doing unconventional things. What can I say? Her first job out of school was working with vets, helping them treat their PTSD with therapy. And so her stories are wild. Some of the things that she's experienced with her work in that regard. But she was nominated. She spoke at the Senate as a special subject matter expert on treating PTSD. She was nominated as special counsel to the president on that subject of treating PTSD. And so, all of her stories, I'll try not to get too into it, but I will say that at one point she started realizing that in order to really get deep healing results, she had to go beyond what she had learned in school. And so she got into certain powerful spiritual traditions that started providing her tools that she could use in her healing practice in her clinical psychotherapy, which was technically not legal, quote unquote, but nobody really, the clients didn't mind, and nobody knew the difference except for those clients were getting better outcomes. And so at a certain point, she was like, she devoted herself completely to spiritual traditions, and she got out of that clinical work. And ultimately, she became a lineage holder, traveling to Eastern Europe and traveling to the Himalayas and having legitimate empowerments from lineage teachers, giving her these traditions of healing and practice, legitimate enlightenment traditions that include entheogenic sacramental rituals. So I found her through synchronicity. 11 years ago, I had heard about her through my network of friends. And we crossed paths a few times over the years just by chance. And it wasn't until 2000 end of 2017 where I actually felt like I needed to contact her directly and get into what she was doing. And I did that. I emailed her and said, I feel called to work with you, to help your any projects you have, and I want to learn from you. And so, that after some time of doing that, collaborating, all of this stuff started transpiring. We were living in Colorado at the time, living and working in Colorado, and Denver decriminalized psilocybin. And everything, all of these dominoes started going off, and we had already been working on this vision and this idea for a project. And so so when we went to name it, she was like, that was 100% her, like, let's call it Moksha Medicine. And then she was thinking back to when she was a teenager. And so we were running with that, but then our legal counsel suggested maybe we not use the word medicine. Because we do have a medical doctor on our team. We have PhD in biochemistry on our team. We have numerous different licensed psychotherapists. But for multiple reasons, we decided not to use the word medicine in our company name. So we went with Moksha Journeys. But Rose is really the one, I feel like I stole a little bit of her thunder telling you that story, but she's the one to talk to about Moksha Medicine for sure. I mean, I can speak a little bit to Huxley and the island, but she's the reason that is in our name. Also, even from the fact that I practice in the traditions that she, collected, especially the Himalayan ones, where where the Sanskrit is Sanskrit and Tamil. Our practice is oriented around moksha as a core component of our ethos. So we didn't just pick Moksha Medicine because of Huxley alone. There's layers to it.
Right. Yeah. It seems I would love to. I'll reach out to her after this. I love to hear the origin stories, and I'm thankful to get to hear yours. I think it would be amazing to get to hear hers as well. And I hope she'll want to come on, because I think it's important, especially now more than ever, to get people that have a lineage of healing to get their ideas and to get their stories on record, because I wish there were more of those resources for you and I to turn towards. So I think it's responsible of people like us to try to make sure that those messages get out there. So yeah, please, I would love to talk to her more. And so were there other influences? I mean, it sounds to me like you were called to meet with this person and you began practicing these things. What sort of healing techniques were taught to you from the Himalayas or from those traditions? Or is there something you can talk about from those traditions that, yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of this subject matter is kind of held in strict secrecy. And so there are many things that I won't talk about, but,
Right.
but I will say that, like, in 2009, I went to Southern Colorado, to a remote town in the Rocky Mountains that the town's at 8,000 feet, and you can walk out your yard into directly up several 14ers. And I moved there to study full time in a tradition, well, with a couple teachers who had affiliations with Himalayan traditions. So, that's like growing up in Southern California, and how I told you my origin story, was leading me more and more towards the Indian enlightenment traditions. And in 2009, I took that big step. I was like, not only do I want to go to classes in my area or this local community, I want to do something more serious. I want to go deeper. And so I sought out some people, and I went to Southern Colorado, and one of the teachers there had lived for 7 years in the lower Himalayas, with a teacher who has written a lot of books, who an Indian. I'll tell you, he's in the lineage, the Kriya Pranayam lineage, that is commonly known as connected to Mahavatar Babaji, and that is well known through Paramahansa Yogananda, but there are many other inroads to that tradition. There are other teachers, other people, like that family tree of practitioners. So I got into that, and through that, I became very interested in the Indic kind of herbalism traditions, which are encompassed within Siddha medicine and Ayurveda. And largely, there's the bioregional differences in herbs, but there are many commonalities amongst the herbs between North and South India. And, there's the linguistic changes, but a lot of the core tenets are very similar, if not identical, between the North and South Indian cultures, and their medicine traditions. And so, it was that study in the Kriya lineage that really started igniting my passion for studying Ayurveda. Because I had already gotten into clinical nutrition. I started practicing clinical nutrition in 2011. February 2011, I opened my practice in Colorado. And one of my earlier teachers, who was a clinical nutritionist, was also a doctor of Oriental medicine. So they were teaching us the meridian system and the acupoints, and a synthesis of how to work with herbalism, and assessing the acupoints in conjunction with your herbal medicine. So I was introduced to the 5 elements ideas, and they were also introducing to us Ayurvedic concepts. But over time, I started realizing the level of depth that exists in these other 5 element traditions. And so I became, that's what drew me. It was like, okay, who wrote the Vedas? What are the branches of the Vedas? What is Ayurveda, and what is the context of it? And that's what drew me deeper into both the study of the medicine path as a whole, in a clinical sense, and how psychedelics fit into that historically within my own lineages and within the lineages I would continue to seek out, new lineages. And so that was, that I spent 10 years living in Southern Colorado. And I did end up studying, or I ended up getting influenced by a number of different herbalism traditions. I corresponded with different people who really inspired me in different areas of the world, because I had gotten a lot of momentum. Once you start doing things, right? I was seeing clients and really testing protocols, right? And what is what really works. And my experimentation clinically ended up kind of arriving at the conclusion that all of the best healing results that I had seen with the people that influenced me, they are using combinations of intact medicine traditions that incorporate psychedelics amongst the other forms of herbalism. So I practice a synthesis of, the best of modern science with the best of lineage tradition. And, it's like working on the body as a whole. So, we incorporate things into our neural wellness protocols that are, that they're truly holistic, and they accomplish some wonderful outcomes. But in terms of, the Himalayan connection, it's like Mahavatar Babaji, I just started realizing, like, he doesn't exist in a vacuum. You can study everything that he was a part of. It's out there. A lot of, I mean, some of it's in English. I mean, the bulk of it's not in English, but it's like some people have published papers, that I've seen papers on the Indic psilocybin traditions, and people have, since Wasson, have proposed ideas for what is soma. And I can tell you, I've arrived at a couple of facts, in that exploration, through the last 15 years of devoting myself to this work. And I certainly feel like I'm a beginner, compared to my biggest inspirations. I'm definitely a beginner. But like, in terms of what is soma, there's I would like to expound two aspects of that. One, soma can be defined broadly as a liquid principle in nature. So this is very much correlating with the concept of yin in Chinese medicine. But it has all these correspondences, which is but very much an esoteric thing. But so that's its broadest sense, and it exists in all things that are wet. Certain herbs have a higher amount of this energy, right? And so, I don't want to get too deep into that, but I will say that, there are simple things like oats, common foods that you can tell are very lubricating to the body. Anything that's lubricating to the body is usually going to be high in soma. And soma is something that is, very much used on a day-to-day basis in Ayurveda. You need to get soma to keep your body liquid, and you need to be able to digest and assimilate that soma. So, we get soma from different sources, but, like milky oats is the kind of a herb versus a food, but milky oats are incredibly soothing to the nervous system, right? And if you look at all the properties of that herb, what does it look like? What does it feel like? What is it like when you eat it? What is it like in your mouth? That herb in particular, oats and milky oat tops, are a really prime example of common high soma foods and herbs. But when you get into the science of rejuvenation that's encompassing a whole branch of Ayurveda, there are many of the common herbs that people think about that are soma herbs, that they're rejuvenation herbs, and they help to basically restore the cell salts in the body. And the cell salts are pivotal, in maintaining the proper state of water. And you can get cell salts from different sources, and you can get them from plants. And those cell salts are, help to create a stable hydration in the cells so that your tissues don't dry out. So like there are herbs for hydrating your skeletal system and your connective tissue. And these are kind of like the deeper rejuvenation secrets that I was seeking after. And so that's kind of like a common way that we encounter soma, right, from the environment. Like I live in Southern Oregon now, and the environment is wonderfully wet compared to where I lived in Colorado, right? And you live in Hawaii, so it's like we can actually get that moisture directly from the environment, right? And so we can get it from the environment, from our food, from herbs. And when it comes to herbs, there's like standard kind of normal day-to-day soma, but then there's soma as it pertains to, as it's defined as psychedelic alkaloids, psychotropic alkaloids. So I think that's its most broad definition. All psychedelics can be, well, I would say all natural psychedelics can be defined as soma. in my opinion. And so that's its most broad sense. But there is a true Vedic soma, and it's not the Amanita mushroom. But the Amanita mushroom does have soma in it, you know. And this, the secrets of the Vedic soma are out there, and they can be it can be understood, and it's a ritual that can be engaged in an authentic way. But it's like I don't diminish Amanita in any way. It's it is an amazing fungi, and it has all its long list of benefits and uses beyond psychedelic. It has medical benefit as well. And so Amanita is an important fungi, in human history and human experience. But I think there's factual evidence. I know that there's factual evidence for proving that the Amanita theory of soma is not exactly correct. It's not what's being referred to in the Rig Veda, Mandala 9. That's not what they're talking about. But if you take the broadest definition of soma, Amanita does kind of fit in there in a sense. It is soma, right? It's one of those things like where all psychoactives are soma, but not all. not all mushrooms are psychoactive, but not all are soma. In terms of the Vedic soma, right?
They're exactly the same, only different.
Right. Right. It's like,
I'm with you.
We have this discussion around a lot of things like
yeah,
tequila and mezcal, right? all mezcal is tequila, but not all tequila is mezcal. Right.
Right. Tequila is an interesting one because it has to be made in Tequila, Mexico, right? Like that's the only way it can be tequila. Same with champagne in France. Like, is it champagne or is it prosecco? I guess it depends where it's made, right? And I'm sure if you talk to the right distiller, he would say, "Listen, George, you don't understand what's happening over here in this part of Mexico." But yeah, I think it's a fascinating concept, and I think it paints a picture of what it takes to begin to understand the necessary pathway for healing. And I'm wondering, after spending time in Colorado and being inspired by Rose and having the childhood that you did, at what point in time did you decide, like, okay, I think I'm ready to help heal somebody? That seems like it's a missing step we haven't talked about yet. Like, there had to be a point where you're like, okay, I think I'm ready to start helping people now. Am I just making that up, or was there a point where you decided you were good enough, or someone helped you say, look, man, I think you're ready to do this?
Right. Yeah. And I mean, well, yeah, if we go back and we look at, like, after I had my first psilocybin journey, there was no integration support. So
figure it out, right?
Right. And it was challenging. I feel like I actually did need decades later to talk about it with integration professionals to really get the full integration. And so, but definitely, it was like, once I made those realizations about the nature of reality, it was like, I determined, and I had the psilocybin journey, and I'm like, okay, I understood a lot more about the illusory nature of reality, and concepts of time. My concept of time changed, and my ability to think for myself and follow my own path really came out. And so, and that was at a relatively young age, and the culture was not very supportive of that around me.
It's still not.
Right. Yeah. So, but I did, I just decided, like, here's this path that my parents carved out for me.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm not going to do that. Right. So, instead I remember being a boy and thinking, look at these neurologists that are trying to help me. They're so amazing. They're so smart. I want to be like them. I want to be like, in this position that they're in. And, then by the time I was a teenager, I'm like, No, I'm not going to do that. Um, so, um, and so, yeah, it was like when I was supposed to like follow this specific trajectory in my studies and like go to a certain type of institution and like have a very specific career path.
Right.
And then, I ate the psilocybin, and then I was like, I have to find my own way.
Yeah. Yes.
And so that's where it all changed, right? In my late teens, I'm like, okay, all these things I've been interested in, I'm gonna fully devote myself to them. And so I started studying them, right? In every different way that I could. And so I got into clinical nutrition. I got into herbalism, and not only was I studying it intellectually, but like I was also, of course, devoting myself to it practically in every way that I could, investing all of my wages into buying herbs. I was immersing myself in the healing path and like testing everything that I learned on myself. And, so much that, I mean, it's been decades of that, because once you figure out what works, then you're constantly working on refining it and maintaining your health and rejuvenation. That's really the path of Ayurveda, and specifically the Rasayana path is, the path of rejuvenation is a lifelong effort, with progressive phases of going deeper into maintaining your cell salts and rejuvenating your systems. So, that, that in that phase, is years and years and years of study, is like, during that time, I kind of like, I was trying to make ends meet. So I started working as a supplement. I sold supplements at the biggest supplement store in Southern California, which had an incredible inventory of herbs. I mean, they started out in the 70s, selling just herbs in this little beach town. And over the years, I mean, I grew up shopping there, and I was a little boy going to eat the sample vitamins. Like, oh, can't! I was so excited to like pop open the tester bottle and get kids' chewables. And me and my brother like run to do that. And so then I started working there later on, and I saw, people would come in and be like, they would just ask you questions, and I used to get training from the supplement companies. Like, a lot of big names would come in and do these little afternoon classes. And so it was like companies like New Chapter and Mega Foods, and smaller ones like Eclectic Herbs, and local brands like Health Force Naturals, or Health Force, whatever it is now. And, so they would tell you all about their products and what's in them and how to use them. And then people come from the community and they're like, I need something. And so that was the very beginning where I wasn't really ready, but they gave me information and it was like, go. So, you're like telling people, yeah, get these cordyceps. I mean, that was decades ago. And I'm like, yeah, you're trying to get a boost, take these cordyceps. We got this ginseng, we got these nettles. And, it was like so many products. And, that's how it turned into, once I ate the psychedelics and I was doing that work and I'm doing my studies on, and, it was like, then the community I was in, a lot of experimentation with the plant-based diet and psychedelics. And that, that's how it all started, like putting all your wages to buying herbs. Like, okay, we didn't know anything though. It was like, husho woo. Okay, let's read everything we can and take it. And we didn't know anything about traditional guidelines, or the scriptures or the source texts, or how to recommend something properly. And so it was kind of crazy. It was like, if I look back on it, I'm like, God, this is just wrong. Maybe not even beneficial, but we're passionate, and we were being employed of the team of people. That's what they still do to this day. I mean, people from the local community just go in that shop and ask questions and buy products and experiment. But the more that I did my studies, the more I started realizing, I got to do things a little differently.
Yeah.
And so then my next job was, um, well, I also waited tables at that point, and then I got to the point where I'm like, I have to make a big jump away from this stuff. Like, I don't
Mm.
want to work in supplements. I don't want to work waiting tables. I don't want to work, at these stores, shops. And I was like, universe, I really felt strongly, like, universe, I need to do something in this interim period where I'm studying. And I need to, like, have a huge shift to something that feels better. And, I kind of really felt the entrepreneurial spirit. And I kind of started doing my own thing, which was, through my connections in the community, I knew some guys who had started a superfood company, and they, were like, "Yeah, we'll give you a wholesale account." And I was like, "That's it. I'm gonna start selling superfoods,
Mm.
right?" So I bought stuff that I felt like was reasonably safe for most people, right? So we were buying all the major foods like, um, you know, hemp seeds and goji berries and, some of the herbs, simple herbs that I felt like were safe, and, minerals. I was really big on the
Right.
minerals. And so I was just buying my wholesale inventory and then organizing local talks and selling my own supplements. And I was, focusing more on things that felt right for me to sell instead of trying to sell like everything under the sun.
Right.
Um, and I didn't even have any say in it, before. Um, so I started selling those products on my own. And then at the time, I got into a relationship with someone who was owning and operating a retreat management company.
Mm.
And they were involved in hosting these wellness retreats all over the world. Um, they were going to South America and, hot springs in all over the U.S. and Canada, and so I started. I mean, I was in a relationship with this person, and then at one point I started working with them, and we went to Indonesia and did some wellness stuff, wellness retreats in Bali,
Wow.
and yeah, we had various people that we consulted to, and I ended up, um, shifting to Arizona, and for about a year and a half, I was doing that same type of thing at a permanent location where I was like basically, on the staff of a wellness retreat, and they let me host my talks. And I also got into cold lasers at the time, so
Mm.
I was providing, certain types of cold laser services, and set private sessions with cold lasers, and I would sell the cold lasers as well. They were approved for kind of consumer use. So so that's what happened. People would come to this wellness retreat, and I would help, behind the scenes managing different things. Like I did website, management, and I managed the inventory for, herbs and superfoods, and I managed certain aspects of, creating living foods like bulk fermented vegetables, for the clientele to eat on the certain programs. And, um, I also brought in like the raw spring water program for everyone to drink raw spring water from the local spring that I would harvest. And, um, so that was like felt a lot better for me. I felt like I was getting paid as an independent contractor,
Mhm.
and, I was a little bit more of a real entrepreneur, and I felt like I had more control, and, it was a really good experience. Um, and I got to live at this incredible location, in a rural area. It was so super beautiful. And so then so I was doing that for years, like
Mhm.
how many years went by? Like 7 years went by. And then I got to the point where, what, the last mentor that I had, um, he was a Japanese acupuncturist, and he had gotten into, um, these clinical nutrition things as well. And so our paths were aligning through basically through clinical nutrition. And he was giving me a lot more insight into acupuncture from a different angle, because one of my teachers is, as I mentioned, a doctor of Oriental medicine, but I wasn't an acupuncturist. And so he was mentoring me in certain ways and opening my eyes to a lot of things. And it was like I got to a point in my clinical nutrition studies where I went through a clinical nutrition program, and then I had all these mentors, and after enough time with my mentors and going through a program and feeling like I had not only the intellectual basis, but my mentor support was there as well, and I was like, I feel capable. I'm at the point where I'm in a position where I can open a practice, and so I did that. But I moved from northern Arizona to southern Colorado to do that, so that I could open my practice in proximity to these teachers of the Indic Enlightenment traditions that I was pursuing. So, I lived either at an ashram or next door to the ashram for many years, where I would wake up, and it was a place where they kept horses. So I would, we had to, as Seva, we would take care of the horses and take care of the ranch. And, I learned all these things that I didn't know growing up that wasn't a part of my upbringing. Like I did all these firsts, like we constructed horse shelters from scratch, and we fixed the wire fencing, and, like learned how to live on a solar off-grid property at 8,000 feet in a remote area with no infrastructure. And so, like dirt roads and forest, and, like 1,000 people. And so, this community there it's built around retreat centers. And in the warmer months, all these people come from all over the world to do retreats with these different lineages. And so the economy booms in the warm months and then shrinks in the winter. And, it's like so I realized in the winter I needed to have an online business, and I started building some online businesses. But anyways, it was like, so that's what I was doing, is I opened a practice doing clinical nutrition and herbalism. And I then opened an online business where we were selling herbal formulas. So it was the next evolution. Now we were selling more clinically oriented formulas, and we sold formulas that help to work on chronic infections. Actually was our main specialty. And so that's actually been a main component of my work, is I have a big focus on chronic infections. And neuroimmunology is one of my studies. I got into neuroimmunology through some people. The main teachers were Dr. Karazian in the functional medicine community, and so studying people around him, like Dr. Hal Blumenfeld, neuroanatomy, and these different functional clinical methods. That was a huge component for me. So it was like so that's why I mentioned, like at one point I said the synthesis of tradition and modern science. I had been exploring psychedelics, and I'd been exploring these traditions, and then I started having just organic experiences, where once I opened my practice and you get that rubber on the road and you see what works and what doesn't work. And, like I said, that I feel from everything I have been able to ascertain from my direct experience, as well as from other sources, that the best clinical healing results when it comes to, I don't practice medicine, but when it comes to herbalism, when it comes to traditions like Ayurveda and 5-element systems, these are the areas where I feel the best clinical outcomes happen. And in my opinion, it happens when you get that synthesis of the best of the traditional and the best of the modern scientific. And it was through my own exploration of like seeing these principles, where things intersect, and how I could create formulations with different types of ingredients that I didn't see anywhere else. But as I used herbs, as I used both the rejuvenation herbs, as well as the psychotropic herbs, I started seeing there's a place where all of this intersects, and all the light bulbs were going off. And you know. So I feel like I'm going past your question a little bit. But you know, it was about a period of 7 years where you know, I was studying and experimenting and learning and trying to work jobs and doing and kind of bridging the gap until I could get to the point where I could do what I do now.
Mm.
Um, so you know, and in that, like, it's still an ongoing process. You know, I actively engage in continued education. You know, and right now, for the last 6 years, I focus the bulk of my continued education on authentic lineages, um, going really deep into intact lineages. But I continue to keep up to date with science. You know, like I, I, I spend time with reading all of the papers that are relevant. You know, I read them in as a whole. I read the methodology. You know, it's like, you know, abstract methodologies, results, conclusions, and I get deep into, you know, maintaining what I've created and evolving it. And so that's what goes into the neuro wellness protocols. And you know, the neuro wellness protocols are really kind of like what I bring to the table. You know, it's like Rose brings this incredible base of like understanding how to work with deeply entrenched patterns, and that's really what Moksha Journeys focuses on. You know, we are specialists in working with all types of rehab. You know, our team works on some of the most difficult cases, cases that other people turn away even. And so we work with people who have histories of trauma, people who have early childhood trauma, complex PTSD. You know, we work with people who, you know, need deep healing. That's not all that we do, but you know, that's kind of what we're geared towards, and that's one of the areas in which the neuro wellness protocol shines.
Yeah, I think it's relevant because I was going to ask this question. I think you covered it, but you know, it seems to me that one, you have to find your own way before you can help someone figure out what it is that they're looking for. If that kind of makes sense, like, you know, how much of the problems do we see manifesting themselves are a symptom of someone that is not living a life that's true to their nature? You know, I mean, it seems for a very long time, all of us have been plugged in to a job or a position or a label that was given to us by our culture. You can be a fireman, you can be a truck driver, you can be a doctor, but stay in the mold. Don't go over there. You know, and it seems like as long as everyone stayed in their lane, then we were moving. We had this myth of progress that was taught to us, that was given to us by our schools. And now it seems that maybe it's because I'm getting older, or maybe it's what's really happening out in the world is this veil is kind of being lifted, like, hey, that was all kind of bullshit. Look at that over there. And people are starting to freak out a little bit. So when I start to hear people like you, or I see these industries of healing that are intertwining the ideas of traditional and science, it just seems like this more holistic approach. Like, you need both of them. Like, you need to have, you know, you need to have both pillars. You need to have that double helix spiraling up if you want to be able to cross in between them. And I guess I want to get into the protocols, but before I jump into there, I have just one question that goes to the idea, and I think you're unique to answer this because you have traveled to India, you've traveled to these different places, and one of my ideas is that it's not necessarily my idea, but it's this idea that, you know, different countries have different diseases. Like when you go to India, are there like a lot of young girls that are anorexic there, you know, or, you know, it just seems to me like different societies have created different illnesses. Is that something you found?
I would say yes. There are commonalities amongst global cultures. You know, like the effects of burning fossil fuels. You know,
Mm,
it's like,
yeah, that,
but I don't want to digress, but
yeah.
you know, like that's a major thing that unifies all humans in terms of
Mm,
disease pathology, you know, because it's like it's carbon is not the main issue in my opinion.
Okay.
From listening to other experts in environmental science, like it's the chemicals. There are many other types of chemicals in fuels, and those chemicals, when they're burned, they create metabolites, and so they're oxidized, and then you have hydrocarbon-based toxins besides carbon. And so you can look it up. Look at the list of additives in gasoline. You can look it up on Wikipedia, and it's pretty accurate. All of those chemicals end up in an oxidized form in the environment. And so that is creating a severe toxicity for the planet and for humans. And, it definitely depending on your, genetics and your environment, your lifestyle, that toxic stress affects you one way or another, and some worse than others. So I do think that, some diseases have these global unifying aspects. But when it comes to, diseases, spiritual diseases, spiritual psychological diseases, definitely, those are things that, like, each culture has its own neuroses that
Right.
on its
That makes
people.
sense. That makes sense. Okay, so I'll birdwalk and go crazy on different things like that. It's fascinating to me. Thanks for allowing me to ask some of those questions. But let's jump into what the neural wellness protocols are. I think I've been teasing people long enough. Let's talk about, and maybe you can define what neural wellness is, and then you can tell us about the neural wellness protocols that you have developed.
Okay. You're asking me to define what is a neural wellness protocol?
Yes.
Okay.
Maybe, what is neural wellness? Maybe we could start with that and then the neural wellness protocol.
Sure. I'll start with saying that the compound word is something that we like to use because for us, like, it's at that level. Like,
right.
It's we practice neural wellness, and it's not two words, it's one word. And it's really simple at its core, just as those two words imply, or the compound word implies: neurological wellness. So this is a particular relevance when we do the psychedelic work, right? Neural wellness isn't limited to psychedelic work, but it's very intertwined with it. So like, as I said, I don't practice medicine. I am not a medical doctor, but I do practice wellness. That's primarily what I'm interested in, health and wellness.
Mm-hmm.
And so when it comes to neural wellness protocols, there's the broad definition, and then there's the different types of protocols. But neural wellness is anything that we do to cultivate neurological wellness or health. A lot of our clients are starting out with a lot of severe kind of neuroimmunological issues. And so especially our work focuses around neurotransmitter health. And there's the Ayurvedic way that I look at that, and then there's like the functional way that I look at that. So that's basically what it is. I mean, we work on all the things that people talk about, and we have our unique ways that we work on them. Like, people have been I've seen different blogs out there, people introducing the ideas of, like, or the questions of how do psychedelics affect the gut-brain axis or the brain-gut axis. That's a question that's very much kind of coming out of the functional community. And that's something we work on. But in particular, how do neurotransmitters affect your psychedelic experience? And how does your neurotransmitter health affect your therapeutic outcome? Like, your baseline neurotransmitter health, your neuroimmunology, how does that affect one's therapeutic outcome when taking psychedelics? So if you look at the progression of studies that are coming out, like you see the various Johns Hopkins papers or Imperial College of London, both of them in collaboration with Beckley Foundation, which I think I'd like to touch on maybe a little bit later. There's people are starting to show how long do the benefits last after a certain number of journeys, whether it's, one journey, several journeys, how long do you get the benefits? And I have my criticisms of how they look at these things. But one thing I've been saying for a long time is that, from my experience with myself and working with my clients, you can definitely create shifts using the psychedelics, and they can be long-lasting shifts. But the deepest integration, in my opinion, happens when you heal your body to the point where the expanded state of awareness that you experience in a journey is matching your day-to-day consciousness in your body. So having an expanded state of freedom with your health and wellness, are you bringing that change that you realized all the way into the physical? And the psychedelic doesn't do that on its own completely. Like it does and may affect certain physiological changes, but it doesn't do all the work for you, right? And so that's kind of along the lines of like working on the gut-brain axis and the brain-gut axis. And, that's kind of where the neuro wellness protocols come in, because, this is I want to introduce it at the right time in the right way, but, I'm not sure if you've seen any of our content around this yet, because we're just getting going. But that the main star of the neuro wellness protocols are what I call my stack. I haven't named the stack. It's very different than the Stamets stack. It has no relation to it. But it is a stack. It's a formula.
Yeah.
And you can you can make that formula in different ways. You could put it all in one capsule.
Yeah.
Or you can combine it in different ways with different materials. Right. And so that I have my primary core stack, and then I have kind of a supplementary protocols, so we work with people who have come off, who are wanting to come off of, a lot of people do this, but I'm saying it, we do work with people who want to be off their antidepressants. So they may have already titrated off according to their doctor's instructions. But, they need support to really be well after that. So they do the journeys and they do microdosing. Neuro wellness protocols are things that can help tremendously to bridge, like, for instance, if you come off of an SSRI or SNRI, you may not feel great,
Yep, it's true.
It's a common thing, right? We see it all the time. And so a neuro wellness protocol can naturally help support your brain health and wellness so that you feel better in that intermittent period where you're, going to take your journeys or going to do your microdosing, and you need additional support, because there's a gap there,
Yeah, makes sense.
So that's one area. And then the stack, people can do both things. Like the stack is something we incorporate in the journey work primarily. So people might do both things. They might have a neuro wellness protocol that they're doing before they come to a journey, to help them on the day-to-day until they get to their journeys. And they might continue with that neuro wellness protocol during and after their retreats. But then the stack is something we employ during the journeys. And, this is kind of like where I like to reference the Beckley Imperial and Beckley Johns Hopkins studies and analyses, because there's some really great data there and representations of that data that help to illustrate my points really well. So, this really did come from this kind of all these different synchronicities with my personal exploration and my studies, where I was just getting these aha moments, seeing how things were working in my body and having different types of journeys and connecting different dots. And, I was able to make this realization that if you have major dysregulation in your neurotransmitter system, where to the point where you maybe are taking pharmaceutical antidepressants or something similar, or maybe you're not, but you're at that same level of dysregulation, um, and that's affecting your mindset, right? So that's part of your set.
Maybe you could define that a little bit more for people. Like when you say neurotransmitters are disrupting their system, like does that manifest as depression or anxiety, or can you maybe broaden that so people could understand like what that means?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully you can keep me on track.
No, you're doing a great job. I just wanted you to. I get what you're saying, and I'm sure a lot of the audience does.
Yeah.
But for people who may listen to this or jump right in, like what does that mean when your neurotransmitters are out of alignment, or
Right.
what does it mean when they're not in a healthy state?
Right. So I'll take a step back with that.
Yeah.
And say that, like, I primarily come from the Ayurvedic standpoint with my work. And when we look at mood, and we look at all the things that can affect mood, when we even use the word neurotransmitter,
Right.
There's this, we can get really granular with current science on it and the debates that are being had around neurotransmitter mediated models of depression and treatment. But I look at it from a different angle, which goes hand in hand with the science, which is that neurotransmitters, which I think people basically may know that, like, there's some connection, there's some correlation between your neurotransmitters and your mood, right? That neurotransmitters, what are they? I mean, I equate them to brain hormones, essentially. And I think that lines up. I've had a lot of corroboration on that idea. Like, it's basically a brain hormone, and it's in the gut as well, right? That axis, but it's part of the nervous system. So whether it's in your gut or your brain, we're talking about nervous system hormones. Serotonin in the gut, serotonin in the brain. These are brain hormones. All of them. We can list them off, but yeah. So, but what even is a brain hormone? I mean, we there's a couple ways to look at that. Hormones are basically controlling our expression of energy, right? Adrenaline and cortisol are affecting having energy or not having energy, right? In terms of getting up, being able to do things physically, right? Stand up, move, physical energy, right? So that's that type of energy. Your reproductive hormones are affecting your sexual energy, right? Do you have the energy to engage in healthy sexual expression or not? If you don't have the energy to do that, if it's declining, then we need to take a look at your reproductive hormones, or just the hormones that come from those glands, no matter what stage of life you're in. And so they're units of energy. And so from a traditional perspective, I look at it like this. They're part of the liquid principle in the physiology. And so when we have different pathologies that increase heat in our body, it can come from different angles. There's all different ways in which we can get factors that burn up our liquid, right? And that's the basis of aging. Whether we're talking about just water or we're talking about hormones, in Ayurveda, we would kind of use certain Sanskrit words like snigdha, which means oily, right? And so, yeah, this is coming from this is correlated to this concept called ojas. Ojas is basically the raw energy that you need to fuel your immune system. And if you have healthy immunity, you have a lot of ojas. And if you have a lot of energy in general, that energy is this substance that's quantified in Ayurveda. Vitality is quantified in this concept of ojas, and you can get to a point with ojas where you have enough of it that your immunity is at the point of like heroic immunity. I taught a class on that called heroic immunity, because the word for that level of immunity is bala, and bala means strength, and bala is a word that it's a word that is associated traditionally with heroes. Whether it's the medicine masters at the root of the Ayurveda traditions, you know, a word that's associated with them is this word virya, which means potency. But it really is this, kind of associated with the word hero. So virya is potency. And so these words like these heroes, they have bala, strength. And so that it's kind of like this, the concept of bala is really closely tied to ojas and immunity. If you have bala, it's because you have immunity, you have this immune strength. And the fuel for that is the liquid principle. It actually starts at its most subtle form in nature and filters all the way till we bioaccumulate it in our physiology. And it forms the cerebrospinal fluid, and it forms hormones, including brain hormones like neurotransmitters, which are an oily substance that's secreted by the glands. And that's the key word there, secreted. What does that imply? Right? It implies that it's some type of liquid, right? You secrete liquids, right? Whether it's milk or sweat or sebaceous fluid, you know, you're secreting oily, unctuous is actually what Snigdha translates as, unctuous substances. So, you know, and there's all kinds of tools that you use in Ayurveda, like putting healthy fats on the skin to get the endocrine gland that is the skin to produce hormones, right? Because we know that you eat fat and cholesterol helps to produce hormones, right? You need minerals and you need cholesterol. So the skin can produce hormones. Your brain can produce hormones. Your gut produces hormones. Your gland is producing hormones, right? So, that's how it all ties together.
Right.
And soma is really the origin of it. Soma in nature, right? So you look at the foods like snigdha, unctuous foods, you know, that have fat, you know, just look at their whole process of how the plant develops that food and all those correspondences of, you know, how we're getting the unctuousness of nature into our physiology so that we stay unctuous. And that's neurotransmitters. And if someone has, you know, a mood imbalances, it's usually because their system has a pathology where they're burning up their unctuousness, right? So usually all the different types of unctuousness, right? The fluids, the water, the glandular secretions. And so, yeah, the neurotransmitters are getting burned up. And heat is something that is, you know, whether you have a heat excess, like what's considered a heat pathology or a cold pathology in 5 element systems, everybody who has a pathology is generating some type of chronic inflammation, acute or chronic inflammation, right? And so there it is, flame, fire, right?
Right.
What is that doing? What is the flame doing? Inflaming you and flaming or burning everything that's the opposite of the fire. What is the direct opposite, right? We know this, water evaporates. So
that's what the neural wellness protocols are helping to, that's what they're helping to regulate, is this idea of the soma, the water, and the heat, and all together like that. And it's different stacks for different types of ailments, or for different types of I guess it kind of depends on what the person is trying to achieve, what it is that they're out of balance in. Would you correlate a separate kind of stack for a separate kind of ailment?
Well, yeah, first I should say that I don't diagnose, treat, or cure any disease.
Right.
But, you know, we have medical doctors on our team.
Right.
And, you know, they're learning my protocols. But we create custom protocols, you know, like we look at the genetic data, you know, we look at all the different variants, you know, that might be relevant. We look at your history, we look at, you know, all the different things that we can assess, all the different data we can gather, and we create the custom protocols for each individual need. But when it comes to Moksha Journeys,
Mm.
that's where we're doing things that are specifically going to enhance your experience in a macrodose journey, as well as enhance the integration period as well. And so I think that's a good segue into
Yeah.
talking about a couple of these papers that I like to
Yeah, please.
present a little bit, because this is really where our main stack shines and what it does. So I'm gonna put on my glasses here.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't think I could share my screen, but
You might, if you press present down here, you might be able to. I think
okay,
so.
I'm gonna do it.
Okay, yeah, I would love to see it.
Okay, great, awesome. So share screen. Yes. There we go. Share. There it is. Am I coming through?
There we go.
Whoa.
Okay.
How does that look?
It's good. I can read it off. I think
Okay,
I can
great.
okay.
So the first, I really like this particular study and paper. This is the chart that I want to talk about, but
Okay.
it comes from this chart here is an analysis. It was put together by Beckley Foundation
Mm-hmm.
using the data that they acquired in conjunction with this study that was done collaboratively with Robin Carhart Harris and the Imperial College of London. And so let's see, I think I'm gonna take this off of that. Okay, so as you can see here, there was 19 participants, and this is the fMRI study on depression, and those 19 participants are their outcomes are what are depicted here. I mean, this is what they experienced in the journey itself,
Mm-hmm.
journeys that they did. So you can see the purple line here. This is the data from 9 of the participants that they called responders, and then the 10 non-responders. These people in the red category, they did get benefit from their experience. However, these are the people who experienced more challenging aspects in their journey, right?
Mm-hmm.
They called them non-responders because their therapeutic outcome was not as good as the people who experienced greater mystical states.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really what the purple line is all about. They're mapping the qualities of the mystical state and showing, that the responders had greater experience of unity. Versus, if you look to the other side, over here we have it's not directly opposing it, but we have anxiety, and that's really how I look at it. This is what people are talking about when they describe the quote unquote bad trip, right? And we don't use that word, or we try not to use it, or we put it in quotes because we don't know. Anyone who's been around the block knows that there's no such thing as a bad trip. However, when we're talking about working with deeply entrenched patterns, which is our specialty,
Mm-hmm.
we want to go to the best therapeutic outcome. So we want to take people to the mystical state as much as possible. And so that's what my stack does. People can be in a journey and starting to have these emotions, having anxiety. I kind of describe it as a feeling of like a downward spiral. And if I would put a vertical axis on this chart and kind of like a red line going down, like they're spiraling downwards. The feeling state is, like it's destabilizing. And the mystical state is going up, right? You're having these positive, elevating, expansive experiences, deepening into experiences of unity, right? And so that the stack can help someone who is experiencing anxiety, experiencing destabilization, having a very strongly challenging journey. And as soon as they start digesting it, 30 to 60 minutes later, they will go straight to the experience of unity. They will go to a mystical state. It will have a 180-degree turnaround. And I've seen this with myself and with our clients. And so I've this kind of is the topic for really engaging in exciting discussion, depending on what are your cherished belief systems. Because, you know, like so I have found that some people feel challenged by this idea that you don't have to have a challenging journey. You know, you don't have to have a bad trip, even if you might start it out that way. I commented on this post on Psychedelic Spotlight recently, and they had this whole article on their site about, can you do anything about a challenging journey or bad trip, quote unquote? And it's like, well, you can just like try to focus on your mindset or try to feel better, or just do work on it in the integration or whatever it said. It's like there's nothing you can really do, but you can try to get the gold out of it, and it will give you benefit. And you can work on having a good mindset and setting. And so, going into it, as I was saying, tying it back to our discussion about neurotransmitters and mindset, and how, if you're having a challenging time in your life and you're concerned you might not have a great mindset or the right set for a positive journey, that's a major concern that's out there. Like some people don't want to have those challenging experiences. And I can tell you, it's more beneficial to have a mystical experience according to the data. And we can help you attain that with our neural wellness protocols or the stack. And so not only is this, this was the depression study that Imperial College did, but then there's also, the Johns Hopkins smoking cessation study, right? So there's this, actually, that's not the best. Let's see if I have it over here. I don't think I have it on this computer, but there's another graph from the paper with Johns Hopkins where they had this smoking cessation data, and there was several more charts here next to this mystical experience one, but this is really good. It's like, how many people was it? I want to say it was 15. Yeah, it was 15 participants in this Johns Hopkins study on smoking cessation. That was a 2016 paper. I know that this one here was published in 2017, or the end of 2017, the one with the mystical state data and the depression treatment. But the one with smoking cessation, that was a 2016 paper, and it had 15 participants. And they did the 6-month follow-up, and at 6 months, 80% or 12 of the participants, had quit smoking still. They had a great outcome. And, there's a couple other ones where they did some self-evaluations, other scorings, but this really does kind of explain the gist of it, where, on the bottom, you see the greater the mystical experience rating, the less cravings to smoke they were having, right? So here, more mystical experience, better change in craving for smoking.
So let me bring up this though. Like, I think I'm getting lost, and I think some people watching this or listening to this may get lost in the words we're using. Like when you say, and this is the part of the problem, is this subjectivity of it, right? Like if we talk about a bad trip, like this is a good graph. Like if we come down here and we say people are having a bad, like what does that mean? Like if they're having a challenging trip, like that doesn't necessarily have a negative connotation to it. And couldn't mystical also be bad? Couldn't mystical also be negative? Like, so how, I guess the question I'm having is, it seems like the only way we're able to measure this is subjectively, which is kind of, it's not a problem for me, but it's a problem for sciences. And it's also a problem when you try to measure something. Like if you have a stack that can help people from having a challenging experience, might it be that just telling them beforehand that this is going to help, maybe that's what's doing it? You know what I mean? Like, how do you measure that your stack is actually doing that?
Well, I mean, if we wanted to fully prove it, we would have to do a study, which is something that we're, in multiple studies, which is something we endeavor to do. And
Right.
that's why we have research. We have kind of researchers on our team who have cut their teeth on doing
Right.
studies in the past. But, that will come in time, I'm sure. But to answer your question, that this is qualitative data, right? It's not quantitative data. And so qualitative, I mean, some people could call that subjective. Yeah. They're doing their best to try to apply
Sure.
the scientific method to something that is, potentially subjective. But I think they're doing a good job of creating scales and measurements, so like, I think if you dive into, like the mystical experience questionnaire and how that evolved, the MEQ and how that evolved
Mm.
from a questionnaire of 500 questions to a questionnaire of 30 some questions, and something that like Roland Griffiths and Bill Richards have been very involved with developing. The MEQ is the subject of a lot of discussion. I mean, how do you quantify what is a mystical experience? And,
Right.
that's where these things come from. These points here, experience of unity, spiritual experience, blissfulness. People generally don't qualify those things as challenging. It's like, and
Mm.
I think one of the aspects of that is that when you're feeling really good in these types of states, blissfulness, unity, you're feeling generally, you're going toward what I describe it as you're going towards integration. So when you're feeling strongly challenged, generally, if you're on the red line, people tend to feel, or I describe them as going away from integration, because we've seen that these are the individuals, when you have scores more along this red line, where we do a deeply engaged transformational process, right? And I think a lot of other retreat companies out there do that as well, where in the preparation,
Mhm.
you're outlining what type of transformation goals you have. What do
Right.
you want to use this catalyst to work on? And
Mhm.
not only are we're looking to get that change at every level, right? Fully integrate that into your life. And so, like, as I said, they call them the non-responders because these are the people who didn't quit smoking. They would be generally more in this red line. The people who, didn't, their depression didn't shift as much, or, in 6 months, they weren't feeling as integrated. They weren't feeling like they got out of their depression as much. That's why I say the mystical state is helping you go there. It means helping to move towards integration. And I heard one person actually asked me recently, does that mean like maybe that you're more grounded through the stack? And
Mm.
I actually have to think about that, because it was a recent conversation. But in a sense, yes. I mean, you can go inward. I really feel like the scale is, like of psilocybin, is when you go more mystical, you go more inward towards yourself or your true self.
Mm.
And when we're experiencing things like entrenched patterns, whether it's addiction, like I use that word, we use
Yeah.
substance use disorder is kind of like the common word now in science that's emerging. Um, historically called addiction. If you want to resolve addiction, there's you can it can be resolved. Like we looked at the smoking cessation. I mean, we work with all kinds. Rose and our psychedelic assisted psychotherapists, they are experts in helping people. We do rehab essentially, and
Mhm.
that's kind of one of our main programs. And so, if we look at, is someone getting in touch with their true self, meaning, are they integrating and getting out of their negative entrenched pattern where their life is out of control and they're not feeling good, and everything is chaotic and there's major issues and they need an intervention and their community is trying to support them to heal. you know I mean, you can bridge that gap, and we can help you get the best chance of fully taking that step from you know where you are to where you want to be. And the red line is kind of the risk of going for people who don't who don't enter the mystical state as much. The data is showing that you may not end your entrenched pattern. You may continue in that repetitive cycle, you may continue smoking or using whatever substances it is that you've become dependent on. And so, it's like, I hope that I'm answering your question. What do you
No,
think?
you are. I do. It's a very complex question, and no one knows for sure. And the questions I'm asking are purely just ideas that are coming to mind from things that I've read. And I don't have the answers to this, but I'm curious just to get your opinion. Sometimes I think that and I don't even have a graph to prove this, but this is just my personal subjective ideas that I've been through, where I think that the mystical experience is in direct correlation to what I call the oh shit factor. And the oh shit factor is like, oh my God, I've taken too much. Oh shit. Like that to me is usually a sign that I am going to be what Mircea Eliade calls the terror before the sacred. And that's why I think that the mystical has its roots in the fanatical. Like the mystical experience to me is often the understanding. Like I don't have the book Rudolf Otto has written on this. Mircea Eliade has written on this, but it's called like and I know you're aware of this. It's the terror before the sacred. It's almost like being in the presence of God is so terrifying because you see this thing or you're part of this thing that is so beautiful. There's no words. It's the dog with his tail between his legs, like just pissing himself. Like that is the mystical state for me because it's like, oh my God, I'm in the presence of something so powerful, I'm paralyzed. And that's scary, man. That is like, but that to me is the mystical state. That to me is the transformative state where the magic happens. And it's the height of the roller coaster. Like, oh, and then it drops. But I think those things are correlated. And I think that you on some level, trying to take out that and replace it with the like I don't think you get that, and I think people need that, and like you said, there's no such thing as a bad trip, and shoot, that would be a great point that you and me and 5 other people should sit down and debate. Like, is there such thing? That would be a great debate topic because I know people on both sides that we could really have an interesting conversation about that. And I think people need that. I think that is the dark humor. That is the trickster deity. It's all those things that scare you, snap you out of this crazy cycle of samsara that we're in. Like, don't we need to be scared out of our minds? Don't we need to be in the presence of a God that's threatening us? Like, if you look back at all the religions, like, it seems that you should be scared of God. Our God is a jealous God. Shiva's got 2 different faces on him, right? He's the creator and the bringer of death. Like, and shouldn't you, if you're in this mystical state, shouldn't you see the creator and the bringer of death? And shouldn't you be frightened from that? Does that make any sense?
I love what you're saying. Yeah, no. And I can say that there's actually, in my opinion, no debate between you and I. We're on the same page.
I know.
And the beautiful thing about what you're describing is like, that is really kind of the benefit of the mystical state in some specific regards, those are aspects of it. Because the stack that I'm talking about, it doesn't eliminate those types of things.
Okay,
and that's kind of, I think I was recently describing that to someone, where the stack isn't meant to control what you're going to experience. It's not going to help you avoid something that you need, or avoid some part of the journey that is inherent to the journey, that is part of the medicine, and I think what you're describing is an essential part, because I'm a part of initiatory traditions, and what we're doing and so I'm really on that, right? And Rose is like the queen of that, but what we're doing with Moksha Journeys, people aren't getting formal initiations into our lineages.
Okay.
But, I think psychedelics, by their very nature, are initiatory.
They are.
And we're helping people to create a container for their own initiation experience with themselves that's, going to help them achieve what they want. And sometimes that means you have to experience things that you didn't expect or that you
Hmm.
may have no concept of. And
Yes.
there's these, it's totally paradigm shifting, and that can involve these aspects like you're describing, where it's like awe can, people go into a journey and we can't control if they're going to feel nervous or anxious or
Right.
fearful, or we can help you give guidance. They may have concerns, we may tell them, like, that's part of the process, that's normal,
Hmm.
that's something that
It's
happens
normal.
frequently. Yeah, I mean, it's normal that people take the dose and then 30, 40 minutes in, they're like, having some thing that's so different, and they're like, you know it's blowing their mind, and that might be expressed in some of the ways that you're talking about. So that's one of the big things that I like to emphasize about the stack is it doesn't change what your journey is meant to be. It supports you to have the best journey for
Mm.
you. and
I
and
see.
and it can look a variety of different ways, but at the end of it, that we use these kind of qualitative measures as well as quantitative measures. Like
Yeah.
we're we're in the business of helping people heal substance use disorders, heal complex PTSD. And it's like we see when people attempt those types of healing processes, and it doesn't happen, or it gets delayed, or it might go on unnecessarily for longer periods of time, and then life happens and they might spiral off in some other direction. It's like we specialize in helping people have the most efficacious, you know, journey and process possible. And so, I think that you can't, this is actually, okay. I am not for, I'll tell you, I usually try to talk about what I am for, but I'll tell you that I'm not for the type of psychedelic drug development where we're trying to divorce the hallucinogenic
Right.
aspects.
Right. Right.
And
Right.
I think inherently, if you experience ego dissolution, it's going to be scary. Even
Mm.
with my stack, which is, I think is awesome, it's like,
Yeah.
you're still going to have ego dissolution, and you're going to be like, oh my God, I'm dissolving. I'm dying. Maybe, people still feel like they're dying, and ego dissolution either way.
But
So,
I remember in your, I think in a recent post there was something along the nature of that the stack will alleviate or reverse the process of someone having a bad trip. I think that's where I got caught up, and I was thinking about that. Maybe I read that wrong. Was that accurate, or like what does that mean? Like, was that accurate? Was that in the post or something like that?
I don't know. I'm not sure if we made a post about that. I
Oh,
mean, we did. I mean, we do these Moksha Moments
okay,
Zoom meetings usually once a month.
right,
And so in the last Moksha Moments a few weeks ago, this was the topic.
right.
And so I talked about this, and I'm not sure if we made any post besides that. We
Right.
mentioned it in the event page, or in the comments around that. But I think that that's kind of that is kind of what I was talking about. Like, um, sometimes it can be a cherished belief that, like,
Yeah.
there's oh, and how do you if people want to be attached to their cherished belief that bad challenging journeys are necessary and you have to go through it, we can
Mm.
agree to disagree on that.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
all good. It's
It
all good.
is.
And it's like like I said, I have had challenging journeys myself, and I wouldn't, seek to erase them. Like, I
Mhm.
wouldn't go back in time with a time machine and prevent them. But I have come to the point where I have learned that historically, in our lineages, psychedelics are combined in formulations,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
they're not used as single herbs for the most
Right.
part.
Right.
And so, like Rose, she has been in the Himalayas, in different areas, like the eastern Himalayas of West Bengal, as well as up towards Nepal and Badrinath above, northwestern India. And her teachers there are giving her various psychedelics in ritual settings, in
Right.
lineage settings, and all of them are done in formulation
Hmm.
and for specific reasons. For then it's not just about having a a better journey or a non-challenging journey. I mean, the lineages have specific reasons why they want to use a combination of botanicals to, and people are doing that now. People are like combining, making simple combinations out there. I see different companies making psychedelic products and putting different herbs with them and exploring what
Yeah.
that can do for you. And it's like, that's why I talk about the blending of the tradition and the modern science, because I think that even in the best, most efficacious clinical methods from ancient traditions that are carried through to this day, where I see incredible outcomes with clients, even those can benefit from the little fine tuning that science can bring. And so, like with Rose experiencing those traditional sacraments, and we have a 501c3 church. Rose
Hmm.
formed it in 1997, or maybe 1995.
Right.
So, that in the 501c3 church, like it encompasses all of these. It's specifically the mission of bridging enlightenment traditions of East and West, and it's really big on lineages and lineage
Right.
empowerments and
Right.
going to these locations and getting it uh, passed on. And so, um, that's kind of where we come from. It's like Rose has all these decades of experience, as a clinician, and then we have the traditional experience, and it's in a nonprofit setting. And I've kind of stepped into her arena, and I'm a part of her 501c3 church as well. But that my point was just about psychedelic
Right.
formulation. And I think
Right.
that it's a nascent thing. It's a nascent thing in our culture. And there are cultures where it's highly developed. And there's different psychedelic formulas for different rituals, different times, different reasons, purposes.
Yeah.
So, what we're doing here is we're seeking to provide the best results for our clients. And our clients are happy when when they get those results. So it's all based off of that. Like we seek to be that bridge of tradition and science, and we do deep work of healing, healing transformational journeys. And to do that, we can't accomplish it without something like the stack. I mean, if we don't have the stack, we will we've seen it. I mean, we've done the work.
Right.
I've been a facilitator. Just I consider myself a young facilitator at just 5 years next month. But
Congratulations.
thank you.
Yeah.
And but Rose,
She's got a
several
lifetime.
yeah. And
Right.
so yeah, and it's like now, and then we've brought in other people who have done this work for 10, 15 years or more. And so we have that spectrum of practitioners, and clinicians get it, like uh, if you look at retreat companies and if you talk or try to gather data about what goes on in retreats behind the scenes, like psychedelic journeys with major companies that everyone's heard of, we have a facilitator training to train our in-house employees, and
Hmm.
it's it's approved by the OHA in the state of Oregon, and we train our facilitators according to our method, and people come to us having already gone through all the major programs, IPI, California Institute, Integral
Hmm.
Studies.
Hmm.
We get them on, and we talk about the stack, and people get it. People who have been
Yeah.
doing retreats in Jamaica, it's like there's a high incidence of people having challenging experiences, and I kind of feel like I don't know why. Maybe it's just there's not a lot of exposure, but a lot of facilitators, it's hard. It's hard to go through the prep and the journeys and the integration, and to
Yeah.
see some people getting really amazing outcomes, and then others, they're having challenging journeys. They're not having great integration. The outcomes aren't the therapeutic outcomes aren't as positive, and you're like, it's tiring, and you get a certain type of fatigue from it. It's
Hmm.
along, kind of along the lines of compassion fatigue. And so, I think there's a high incidence of that with retreat facilitators. And, we can help. Not only does the stack help our clients, it helps our facilitators. And so people who are in the ecosystem, other facilitators, they come to it and they're like, this is golden. I mean, it's a win-win for everybody. And we're really excited about it. We're really, we want to learn it. We want to do it. We want to incorporate it. And so, in our company, the neuro wellness team are the ones who kind of administer the neuro wellness protocols, and we work in conjunction with our facilitators, our facilitation team, with our retreats, with our clients. And so, that I think that's just kind of like my opinion is I feel like this kind of stuff gets swept under the rug a little bit. It's like there are people, who aren't, maybe they're not prone, or they're not in a position where they're going to have like this same type of context, some people I think are more prone to having the kind of lesser therapeutic outcomes that I'm talking about, like, this whole two paths that we're talking about. And it's like, like if someone's given a choice, I think, well, at least we've seen when these types of clients come to us, like if we get the chance to speak with them and they get to see what we're about and what we offer, it makes sense to a lot of people. And yeah, that's our mission, is like, we're here to help those who are aligned and resonate with what we do. And
I think it's, I've talked to a lot of different people, and I think that from what I understand, it's imperative to take it. No one wants to go to the McDonald's of transformation. You know what I mean? You don't want to go through a drive-through window and get this thing. It's like a happy, we don't need that. And I love the fact that you guys are breaking it down on an individual level. And the more that I think about it, incorporating an idea of the individual and what their journey should be is probably a really, really healthy thing. And, incorporating lineages, in some ways, like if you look at Georgetown University, if you want to be someone who, works in the world of politics, you're going to go to Georgetown. If you're going to be someone who wants to be a lawyer, you're probably going to go to Harvard. There's different schools, and the same with mystery schools or mystery initiations, right? Like different types of lineages provide people with different types of transformational journeys, whether you're the Pythagoreans or you're one of the women who studied under, Mary Magdalene. Like, I think it's there. And I know you won't tell me what the stack is, but I'm curious over there. I'm gonna have to come out there, Prema. I'm gonna come and check it out myself. I would love to. And I am fascinated by it. And I push back on people because I care about what it is they're doing. And I'm very curious. And I hope that you see my questioning in that light. It's something that I'm curious about, and I want to know more, and I'm enthralled by it. Yeah, I know you do. That's why I did it. You know what I really like is the way when you brought up that graph, and it was almost a spider web form, and you had mentioned, it'd be great if there was like a depth chart on there. Like, you're right. And when you go back and you look at that thing, did they position those like mysticism, anxiety at the bottom? Was that purposely, like anxiety being at the bottom level and that stuff being at the top?
Yeah.
It seemed that way, right?
I think they did do that intentionally. Yeah. And I think that, that vertical axis, like,
yes, what
I'm not sure how to depict it. I thought about it, we want to be able to get another dimension to it so that you can see people going inwards. I feel like mystical state is about a depth of inwardness, right?
Okay, you know what? So are you familiar with 3D printing at all? Have you tried any of that? Okay, so when you go on your for those that are just listening, or for those who are not familiar with 3D printing, when you put the 3D printer in your computer and you're sizing things up, it gives you like a virtual little studio on your computer. And then it gives you like an L model, like an L graph. But then there's another little arm that comes off of it. I think that something like that would be very conducive to understanding the going into, right? Because you could have that other arm come off. And especially with computers now we can have that other dimension. And that would free up the way to measure things, because you would have that other dimension there. But I'm coming up on a hard break from it. And I feel Like you and I have a lot more to discuss, my friend. And
You really, I get it. We got to go, but I really think you're onto something there. I've been trying to think along those lines, and I think, the scientific accepted methods could incorporate that. Johns Hopkins and all these different institutes. I hope that they consider trying to add another dimension to their data sets. The way they graphically depict them. So I think that would be the future for sure.
Yeah, well, let's talk. I know. Cole Butler, if you're listening, Cole, first off, I love you, buddy. And Cole's doing a lot of things with setting up studies and stuff like that. But I think he would be someone that could really, he's someone that I talk to all the time that I'm just like, God damn it, why didn't I think of that? You know what I mean? He's one of those guys. But I think if we all talk together, and I'm sure you have doctors and I'm sure you have people on staff that are setting up studies like that, but he's like a research coordinator. And I think that he might be someone that we could bounce ideas off of, because John Hopkins is awesome, but what about Moksha Journeys? Why don't you guys come up with the own study? Be the first person to put that graph in model. You know what I mean? And
all right.
They can come and be like, hey, how'd you guys figure this out? Like there's from the ground up is what I say. So anyways, before I let you go, where can people find you? What do you have coming up and what are you excited about?
Yeah, I mean, mokshajourneys.com. That's if you're wanting to do this type of work, that's where you would find us. We're on LinkedIn primarily. We're working on getting Instagram going, but primarily we're on LinkedIn right now, and of course our website. And then, we have the in-house training program, bodhi-academy.com, for facilitators who want to consider joining our team, which is constantly growing. We're interviewing people all the time, even today and yesterday. And so, whatever angle you're interested in, those are the two primary gateways. And what do we got coming up? I mean, there's going to be a Moksha Moments Zoom call where you can get on and we'll talk and you can ask questions and engage in conversation, kind of like we're doing, except there'll be more people.
Now we're talking. Now we're talking.
And so that, we'll have to check our LinkedIn. I think it's going to come up at the end of May. And then, we do retreats, so it's like, if you want to find us, it's like you'll find us in a retreat. So, you can book a free exploratory call. We can tell you all about our programs. You can ask all the questions you want at no cost. You can book it on the widget on mokshajourneys.com. And hopefully we'll get Rose on here and you get to there.
Yeah, I'm going to reach out to her. Tell her she better watch out because I'm coming for her. I want her to come on the podcast.
Yeah. And also, I'm just remembering we have a women's microdose recovery group that's going to start shortly. And that's something that's led by Rose and our other female facilitators, our lead facilitator, Sienna, and our new recent facilitator, Rachel. We have other women facilitators as well, but they're putting together a women's recovery microdose group. And so those details are forthcoming. You can sign up for our email list on mokshajourneys.com, and it's in the footer, and you can get the details if you're interested in a women's recovery microdosing group. And also, we have we're just starting our next cohort. So if people do want to join the Bodhi Academy, the training for psychedelic psychotherapists and any organ licensed facilitator who wants to work on our team, that the second cohort is just about to start up. So it's a good time. We will have a third cohort later this year, but the second one's going to kick off. So if you're interested, let us know, drop us a message.
Yeah, I would talk to you for another hour if I could. I'm curious what's in the curriculum. Like, I know I have all these other questions. But I really, really enjoyed this, Prema, and I'm thankful that you shared so much about your childhood. I'm thankful that you've turned on a whole new generation to Tool, and
that was an unexpected outcome.
But a great one, and I'm thankful to get to share in your journey a little bit. I feel like I really got to know you as much as a conversation can in the short time that we did. And I'm really thankful for that. And I look forward to future conversations. I hope you have a phenomenal day. Hang on one second. I'm going to hang up with everybody else, but I still want to talk to you for a minute. Ladies and gentlemen, that was so much fun. And I'm so thankful for everybody here spending time with us. Go in the links, check out what they got going on over there. Check out the post. They have some really interesting things. This idea of the stack and the protocols, I think that everyone should be investigating, and reach out to Prema, pick his brain, and he'd love to talk to you. So that's what we got for today. Ladies and gentlemen, aloha.